Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. Real excited tonight because you were a big fan of the movie Dumb and Dumber, like I was, and its sequels, and just the humor that was in that movie. You're going to really enjoy this tonight because we have the man who wrote the script for those movies. He is a tremendous writer. He's been around the game for, I would say, since like 1985. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you the one and only Bennett Yellin. And Bennett, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Hey, thank you, Mike. And I want to actually clarify the co-writer with my writing
Co-writer.
partners, Peter and Bobby Farrelly, who I worked with for years. I wish I'd written it all myself, but thank goodness I didn't because writing it as part of a team is a lot more fun. Let me tell you.
Right. So Bennett, let me ask you, did you like have a love for movies when you were a kid, TV shows? I mean, how did you decide that a lot of people I ask this as far as acting goes, but how did you decide that you wanted to write movies?
Well, I was born. I'm in my 60s. I was born in 1959, and I think televisions in the 60s or whatever, they were basically babysitters. So I'd be placed plunked down in front of the TV, and so I saw. Fortunately, my parents loved to go to the movies too, and so they'd take us. I have two older sisters, including one sister whose name is Freda, honest to goodness, and she is the Freda Felcher. She is the Freda from who Freda Felcher ends up being in Dumb and Dumber. We borrowed my sister's name for the character. Um,
Wow, that's real cool. Yeah.
yeah. She's. I think she's proud of it. I don't. She feelings about it, but so I loved. I watched a lot of TV. I mean, television was your yeah, you're like a good friend, and so I watched a lot of TV, a lot of movies on TV, and was taken to the theater to see movies. I remember the first movie I can actually remember was at the drive-in, a movie called The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm. I think it was 1963. Big Cinerama, although at the drive-in it wasn't Cinerama. But I was 4 years old, and I remember getting so scared at one part. We had an old-fashioned station wagon with the way back seat, which was the seat that was backwards in the very back, you know. And I was back there, and I got so scared. I climbed into the back, and I hid from the dragon. There was the scene where Buddy Hackett's fighting a stop motion dragon, and I was terrified. That was my first movie experience, but of course I was smitten. So I loved movies, in fact, I like movies. I like television. I really just I gobbled it up, and so what happened was I kind of in watching it, I kind of learned the language of it in terms of how my mind processed what I was seeing and how it broke down, and I think that obviously that helped a lot becoming a screenwriter because I saw scenes in my head the way I would write because I would see it the way it played out in my mind, and the way it played out in my mind was imitating what I saw on the screens and everything like that. So I wanted to, and I fantasized about. I would love to. I mean, we were living in Los Angeles. I was born and raised here, um, and my father had nothing to do with the business whatsoever. No one in my family did, and so it wasn't like I thought, oh, I just fantasized. Oh, I'd love to. I want to write movies. I want to do that. I want to write movies, and I didn't want to act. I had no interest in acting. I didn't feel like I was an actor, but I felt like I was a writer. I felt like that was the way I wanted to create. I wanted to create a film. So yeah, you hit it. I mean, I wanted to do it since I was a kid, and it was a fantasy. And so to have my fantasy, become a reality was a very, very satisfying, wonderful, lovely thing to happen. Doesn't happen a lot.
Right. And I also think, Bennett, you grew up in a time where TV was, in a lot of ways, the only thing you had as a kid, as far as, what I would say is, you know, public access, things like that. I mean, because there was no internet yet, there was no iPhones or any of this stuff. So when you got home from school, if you weren't playing outside, you're going to be watching TV. And then I think about this when you were like maybe 11 or 12 years old. That to me was the heart of TV where it really took off in the 70s. You had shows like All in the Family, The
Oh yeah.
Jeffersons, Mary Tyler Moore. the Brady Bunch was still going strong. So there were just so many TV shows back then that I feel like a lot of kids who grew up in that era either wanted to be actors or they wanted to write. I really believe that.
Yeah, and it was a part of what you talked about. It was a part of the social fabric. You go to school. I mean, it really was. You talk about these water cooler moments, which is such an old-fashioned idea now because A, nobody's at the office anymore. B, there's no water cooler at the office. But you go to school, whether it was elementary school, whether it was high school, and you'd be talking. You'd be talking about what was on Saturday Night Live, on Saturday over the weekend, and everyone would be talking about that stuff. It was part of the social fabric to discuss it. It was a part of your life. It really was. Yeah.
Right. So Bennett, let me ask you this. When you were like in high school, did you write for like any of the school papers or anything like that? Because you always read a lot that's how writers got their foot in the door. They worked on their school newspaper, or they wrote, short stories, stuff like that. Did you do any of that?
I didn't do any of that. I watched it with the kind of, I watched I was in LA, and I went to Beverly Hills High School at the time when it was like the #1 high school in America. It was like the most shining. It was academically the #1 and everything like that. And I would look at them with envious eyes. like I'd look at the drama department with envious eyes. I'd look at the journalism department with that, but I wasn't involved in it at all. I read a lot. I wrote a lot. I was writing, short stories that my best friend and I would pass back and forth. And I loved reading. I loved reading books. I even had, and this will give you an example of how it almost seems like, how could I not have ended up being a writer? But in 8th grade, I remember I had a fantastic English teacher, and her name was Barbara Zussman, but her maiden name, I kid you not, was Barbara Yellin. She was from Scotland, and her father's name was Bennett Yellin. And so she encouraged me to write, and so I started writing like a Hardy Boy. I wanted to do my own version of like a Hardy Boys mystery. So I'd read it to the class every week, a chapter of it. It was only like 10 chapters long, and each chapter was like 5 pages long. But I remember I wanted to be more hardcore than the Hardy Boys, which was sort of like, it was like Nancy Drew. It was, and so at the very end, the very last chapter, it was 2 kids. They were solving a mystery, and the villain actually kills one of them with a shotgun. I remember.
Oh, wow.
So my teacher's reading the last, and she gets it. She goes, "What?" She looked over there like, "What? You just killed one of the kids?" And I'm like, "That's the kind of, But so that was in 8th grade, and then I remember my favorite writer at the time was a famous writer named William Goldman, who wrote Marathon Man and The Princess Bride, and he was my favorite writer. I love the guy, and even in Princess Bride, there's a character named Yellin. There's like a minor villain named Yellin. I'm like, what the heck? So I wrote him a fan letter. This was 1975, and I wrote him a fan letter because I loved his work. I loved his novels, and he was also an Academy Award-winning screenwriter. He wrote All the President's Men, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, among won Academy Awards for those, but he also wrote Misery. And I love the fact that he wrote movies and he wrote books. I loved it. That's what I want to do. So I wrote this letter to him. It was very enthusiastic. It was a gushing fan letter. And at the end, I said, "P.S. You're under no obligation to answer this, but if you don't, I'll kill myself." And I thought it was cute, little sign off. And I got a response back from him, and it was dated my birthday, November 8th. That's my birthday, but it was dated 1975. So I was right. I was in high school, and it said, "Dear Bennett, I hate writing letter. I don't normally answer letters because I hate writing them, but after reading your note, I couldn't have you killing yourself either. So thank you so much for the flattery. I'll try my best not to believe it. Sincerely, William Goldman." And I said, "That's it. God has spoken to me. The God of Goldman has spoken to me. I'm going to be. This is what I want to do, and that's what I want to do." Because that letter was like the okay to go ahead and try and do it.
So Bennett, how did you get your foot in the door? Because that's always hard too. Now you did live in Los Angeles, so that helps because you got to be out in Hollywood to really do this. But how did you get that, like, for, big break? What I mean by big break is, like, how did you get recognized, or how did you get in touch with somebody?
Yeah. Oh, this is a sit back, Mike. This is a long story, but this is the
We
one.
got time.
This is the one you asked. So I went to UCLA as an undergraduate here, and then I went away to graduate school at UMass in Amherst. So my undergraduate degree was a BA in fiction and actually writing, and then I was going to get an MFA in fiction at University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I was going to get that degree, and then my plan was to buy a corduroy jacket that had the leather on the elbow, and get a pipe and go teach creative writing at a class at a university, some small, beautiful university somewhere in the Midwest. That was my intention. It's my first day at UMass. I've never been. I was living at home when I was growing up when I went to UCLA, because I was an Orthodox Jew. I was very sheltered. Very sheltered. And now I'm away from home for the first time. And I'm like, wow, it's a big, this is what the world is like. And it's the first day of school. It's the first class of the first day. And I'm sitting in this small room. Now there's only like eight of us. We're all in the same MFA program. And we have to bring, we're told by the teacher to bring the first page of a short story that we'd written into the class that day. And we brought one in, and the teacher's name was George Cuomo. And he was a heavy-set guy.
Right.
And sitting across from me in class was someone named Peter Farrelly. I did not know anybody yet, no one, but he's sitting right across from me. And so we read the first page of somebody's story, and then George Cuomo said to the class, "Now, I like this first page very much, and I have one very big but." And I looked across the room, and Pete, our eyes were like, we started laughing at the pun.
Yeah.
And as soon as class was over, we went we met in the hallway. I said, "He had a big butt, didn't he?" He did. "What's your name?" "Hey, I'm Bennett. I'm Pete." Instant friends. That's where I met Peter Farrelly. So now we're going to this program, and we knew it's pretty obvious even from that moment that we had the same twisted sense of humor. Now, Peter was from Cumberland, Rhode Island. Excuse me. He didn't know anybody in the industry. And even though I grew up in Los Angeles and born and raised, I didn't know anybody in the industry. My father had nothing to do with it. But we decided, let's just write a movie. Let's write a screenplay together. Why not? We're funny. Let's write a funny movie. So we wrote a movie. We over the course of the next few semesters, we wrote a script. This is the first thing either of us had ever written, a screenplay in a screenplay format. And it was called Dust to Dust. And it was about two idiots who could have been Harry and Lloyd from Dumb and Dumber. They're such idiots who get a job at a funeral home that turns out to be a cover for a mob, they're smuggling drugs. And it was a really funny script. In fact, this is how it never got made, but a joke from Dust to Dust ended up in the movie Green Book that Peter co-wrote and directed. When I saw Green Book, I burst out laughing. I went, "Pete!" Like in the audience was looking at me like, what are you screaming about? But so now we have this script that we've both written. What do you do with it? I mean, who do you give it to? Well, Peter was in New York, and he was on a date, and the girl that he was on the date with said, "You'll never guess who moved in next door to my parents in Alpine, New Jersey. Eddie Murphy."
Oh, wow.
Right, Eddie Murphy. This is like 86. Eddie Murphy is the #1 box office. He'd just come off of Beverly Hills Cop. Right. And he said, "Yeah, you ever see him?" And she said, "Yeah, he was washing his car. I waved to him." Well, he gave her our script. He gave her a copy of Dust to Dust, and he said, "If you see him, give him our script." She called a week later. He said he was coming out to get his mail. I ran out and gave him the script. Okay, so that's impossible. That's the impossible incident #1, because A, it could never happen today, because B, people don't have scripts.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have, the flash drive that no one can get next to celebrities. You can't just walk up to, but this is at a time when he was accessible, although he was the #1 box office. Meanwhile, I had come home for the Christmas Hanukkah holidays to Los Angeles, and my sister Freda Felcher, she was dancing. She went Israeli dancing, and she knew David Zucker of the Zucker brothers, who wrote and created and directed Airplane and The Naked Gun. And
Yeah.
And I said, Freda, would you give our script Dust to Dust to David Zucker? And she gave it to David Zucker. She said, yeah. That again couldn't happen today. No one would accept it. I mean, for legal liability reasons, no person would accept someone else's script. You just can't leave yourself open to that vulnerability. Okay, now in movie parlance, let's dissolve 6 months later, and now there's an article in the LA Times. I printed out, and I have a copy of it here so I can read it. And it was all called the Eddie Murphy Script Derby, and it's all about Eddie Murphy was so hot, everyone's trying to write screenplays for him, right? And so this is what it said. This is how the article opened, and this was, until we read it, we hadn't heard any of this. It said, on a recent Sunday morning, Eddie Murphy glanced out the window of his Alpine, New Jersey home and noticed a neighbor standing in the front yard. Now, they changed the sex accidentally, but under his arm, the man carried a script, a sight that made Murphy take a deep breath as he opened the front door. After chatting briefly, Murphy dutifully tucked Dust to Dust under his arm. Later that night, on a flight to Houston for a concert, Murphy started to read. He liked what he read. It made him laugh. Now Murphy wants to option the story, and the neighbor is on the verge of selling his first script to Hollywood. Here's what happened. He read it, loved it, thought it was funny, came back to Los Angeles. They were trying to find us everywhere. We weren't anywhere. We were finishing graduate school in Massachusetts.
Right.
This was they put that in there for us to read it and call in, to find us. It's ridiculous. We called in with Paramount. We said, hey, we're the guys that wrote Dust to Dust. And they're like, we've been looking for you. Who are you? We said, well, I don't know. We're just finishing our program. That's how we got started. Eddie Murphy. In the meantime, David Zucker called my sister and said, Freda, we want to talk to your brother and his writing partner because we want them to write something for us. We thought Dust to Dust was hilarious. And that's how we got started. We wrote something for Murphy, which was never made. He wanted to direct it. And we wrote something for the Zucker brothers, which also wasn't made. But we also worked on a few of their projects. We even did some jokes for Ruthless People, which is what they were working on. They were about to shoot at that time. But that's how we got started. It couldn't happen. It was, Mike, it's crazy. It's a crazy
story. Yeah, that's a great story. It really is.
Yeah.
So here's my question as well, Bennett. I always ask this because I'm always curious about this. There's so much that goes into writing a script, but how many would you say, if you're writing a film that say it's 90 minutes long, how long does it take you realistically to write that script?
Well, I guess the writing of the first, everything's a process, but the first draft, which is generally, and it also depends on, are you hired? Like there are several scenarios. Like, it can be a spec script, and a spec script means that you are writing it on your own. Nobody's paying you for it. You haven't received a cent for it. You're just creating it at your own pace, and that can take as much time as you need. And I mean, really, so that's kind of open-ended, right? Creating a spec script. That is, of course, the reason why screenwriters like to write spec scripts is because you control the whole thing until you sell it. You're controlling the whole process, which also means you're controlling how much you want your agent or your management or your representatives, how much you want for it, what sort of involvement you want in it if you sell it, things like that. Because technically, once you sell it, it's not yours anymore, unless the contract says, has rewrites worked into it, so they have to come to you to rewrite it and things like that. That's one. So that scenario is very open ended. And then the other scenario is you're hired by a production company or to write a script. They're looking for writers. Sometimes they're looking for rewriters, but generally there's a clock ticking all the time for that. And the script has deadlines in it. It has, from the time you sign the contract, you have 6 weeks to write a first draft, things, or 8 weeks to write a first draft, things like that. So it can change a lot. You can also get hired to do a rewrite of a script that's also that's part of a process of development where if it's good and they like it, they want to make it. So if they want to make it, then that becomes a whole timetable that they're looking at that you have to try and keep staying within that timetable. So it all depends on what you're doing. There's also a production rewrite, and the production rewrite is the script is the thing is in production. It's going into production. The sets have been built or locations have been. It's all been arranged, and you're just trying to rewrite scenes in within that skeleton. You can't go outside of it because you can't write a scene with a new set with a scene that's set in a new set once they build all the sets. And that's a very tight kind of timeline too. So you can see that there are different timelines depending on what you're writing and the situation that you're writing in. Yeah.
And Dave, Bennett, one thing that I don't pretend to be an expert on how writers sit down and they write these scripts, but I do know this, that I think, one of your first projects was Our Planet Tonight. And when you first wrote that, I mean, there was no internet, there was no access to the stuff that people have today. So you're doing a lot of this, probably writing it on pencil or pen or typing it. So it's not the same where the internet, you could just keep writing and you don't have to worry about running out of paper. Where a typewriter, you got to keep putting in paper and stuff like that. So, yeah. I mean, people like yourself and everyone pre 1997, really, it's a credit to all of you how you wrote these scripts, because you, believe me, I'm sure at times it was tedious.
You didn't know any better. It was just the way life was. There was no internet, and there was so information. If you wanted information about something, it would take a while to get it. And you'd have to go through alternate sources to try and find it. And if you didn't have it, then you couldn't access it. Yeah. No, I mean, but that's just the way it was. It's like believe it or not, I know there were times when people did not have cell phones that they carried with them. And so you'd come home and you'd have an answering machine. And that's the only way that you knew. You'd do the thing and you'd have a tape in it. It's the only way you knew that someone was calling you. And then there was pre-answering machines. I remember we had like a pad of paper by the telephone with a rotary dial when I was growing up, and there would be messages, somebody called for you, things like that. It's crazy. But no, I mean, you've got so much. The internet is a double-bladed sword. It's like a library. I think of it as a library that's open 24 hours, and you can access so much information, and then you can also access so much crap that it's just a waste of time.
Exactly. And Bennett, one of the things too that you hear a lot, I mean, it's like a broken record, but it's very true. An actor is only as good as the writing he has and the type of script he has. And I think of, we're talking about actors and famous people. I think of James Gandolfini, because he really did not make it big until The Sopranos. He had done a lot of movies and he'd done different things. Yeah. And really, nobody knew who he really was. And his movies didn't do that well. But then he gets this tremendous writer in David Chase. And then you had the other guys who contributed, that were so influential for that series being so successful. And this guy became an iconic actor. So really, like, when you're writing a script, it's really on you if this movie or this TV show is going to succeed, because if it's not good writing, it doesn't matter who the actor is, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, you see it. There's so much content now. There's so many so much is streaming, and you get to see so much. I can be quite honest with you. I think that the quality of television is like TV is some of the best TV is being written now because it's being written by writers who were writing movies who all immigrated to television because that's where the work was. So
Right.
so there's just great writing being done, but again, it's a you're only a part of the process. The actor is the enactor. They're the ones who bring it to life, and the best. It's thrilling to see. I mean, you can only do the best of what you do, or to the best of your abilities, and then you hand it over, and then you hand it over to the next technician, who's the actor, or artist, who's the actor, and they get to do their thing. And a good actor lofts good material. I mean, there's it's thrilling to see. You can only, even in my imagination of when I'm writing something, what it is, when I see the actor doing it and doing it well, I'm like, this is what it's about. It's for them. They do that, and something, a good television show, a good movie is everybody bringing their best. Everyone brings their best skill to it, and it's thrilling, to see all the tech levels that they're doing their best, and you realize that that's what's so exciting about the industry is when it does well, it's such a representation of artistic expertise. That is,
Right.
yeah.
So let's talk about Dumb and Dumber. And Bennett, the thing I loved about this movie more than anything else, and initially I was maybe 17 years old when it came out. I said, when I saw it advertised, I'm like, I probably won't go and see this because at the time, I mean, Jim Carrey had made it big in Living Color. He had done great with that. And I think The Mask had come out. And Jeff Daniels had done a few things. But really, like, I still didn't look at them as big time actors. But I'll tell you what, the thing I loved about this movie and why I'm so glad I was wrong is it was just a movie that was poking fun the whole time and it was just laughs the entire time. And I think sometimes that's what people need. They don't always want to see a movie where there has to be like a sad twist in there or something goes wrong. It was just two guys who were friends who basically uh, it was deciding who was dumber than the other one really was what it was about. And I just thought it was so genius by all of you guys to come up with such a great film like that. And how did you guys go about doing that film? What was the inspiration behind it?
Well, I just want to go back to the fact that when I was a kid, I wanted to write movies because I wanted to take people away from the problems of their life. I wanted them I wanted to contribute to being able to do that for somebody, to give them a break and make them laugh or whatever. That was my dream as a kid. And it made complete sense because I also was a magician, and they're the same. It's the same idea. You're an audience. I'm the magician behind the curtain. I have all the tricks, and I know how to do it all. And I put on the show for you, and you don't know how it's done, but you react, and it takes you away, and you enjoy it. And then the curtain comes down. They're both simple. They're both different formats of that same sort of idea of I'll put on a show for you, and you'll be happy. And then So with Dumb and Dumber, our only intention was to be funny. We just wanted to make people laugh, and at this point, so once Peter and I started writing together, we wrote together for a few years, just the two of us. But we would always let his brother Bobby, who was a business major and Bobby was off getting a business degree, and we'd let Bobby read the scripts because he always had great notes, very funny comments and contributions, and we'd put them in the scripts that Pete and I were writing. And at one point, we were working on a project. It was actually the sequel to Dragnet. There was Dragnet with Tom Hanks and Dan Aykroyd. They were going to do another one. They were planning to do another one, and we got hired for that. And at that point, Pete said, Bennett, what would you say if we had Bobby join us as a third member of the team?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I love Bobby, and he's hysterical, and he contributes 100%. So that's when Bobby joined us, and we wrote a few scripts together, and they were some of them were rewrites, but also some, like we did the Beverly Hill, the very first version, screen version of the Beverly Hillbillies. We wrote, not the one that got made, but one for Warner Brothers, and then it went into turnaround. But so we were working together for a while on now as a threesome, and we were called, and I don't know how he heard about us or what script of ours he read, but John Hughes, good old John Hughes,
Oh yeah.
Ferris Bueller, he read our script or something, and he had us in for a meeting, and he said, "Guys, I like the way you guys write. I want you to come back and pitch me a comedy." So we're like, okay, fine. So we came back in and we pitched him Dumb and Dumber, and a few years ago, Pete reminded me of this, but I remember I pitched the part where they're talking about Petey's Petey the parakeet's head, and he said, "Yeah, his head fell off," and he says, "Yeah, he was pretty old," and Pete said that John Hughes fell out of his chair laughing. He thought that was so. I don't remember that, but so John obviously liked what we pitched him. He said, "Guys, this is hilarious. Go write it." At that time, he had a development deal at Universal Studios. He said, "Go write it, and if I like it, I'll let you guys direct it." We were like, "What?" So we went and we wrote it, and we turned it in, and we turned in very much the script that ended up being the movie. He loved it, but here's what happens when directors, producers, when they have development deals at studios. When the deal ends, and if it's not renewed and they go somewhere else, everything that they've developed at that studio at that time sort of just falls into a crevasse, and nothing can happen generally ever happens with it. No studio wants to make a movie. No other studio wants to make a movie that person develops somewhere else, because it's not, they're imprimatur on it. So it fell into a crevasse, and nothing happened, and he moved on to Fox and made Home Alone for them, which I'm sure pissed Universal off that he couldn't have made it for them. But so we came back to John about 2 or 3 years later, and we said, "John, what if we took Dumb and Dumber and tried to set it up, somewhere?" And he said, "Yeah, go ahead, you could do it, but just you can't, like, I'm not involved in it. You can't use my name as the producer, or you have to pay me $1 million." And we were like, "Great, we just saved $1 million."
Right.
I not mention you. So he was never ever mentioned. And we took it around, and everyone said no, and everyone said no twice. We kept sending it around. We kept sending it around because not only were we sending it around, but we were also saying that Pete was going to direct it. As it turned out, both Pete and Bobby directed it, both of them really, because Bobby was next to him for the entire time. But everyone said no, so we said, let's send it around again and we'll call it something else. So we had 2 more rounds of being rejected, and one time it was called Go West, and the other time it was called A Power Tool Is Not a Toy, which was a song by a group called the Young Adults, and we just thought it was such a obscure, strange sounding thing that it might, no one would recognize they'd read the script before. But of course, everybody had said no once, twice, 3 times, except for one company, this little company based in Santa Monica. It was 2 producers. The company was called the Motion Picture Corporation of America. And they said, "This is hilarious. We'll make this movie." And we're like, and with Pete directing it, he's never directed anything else. Yeah, we'll let him direct it. I mean, they didn't care, which was great.
Right.
So now there's reality to it. There's traction. There's momentum. There's somebody wants to make this movie. And I don't remember as well who got the script to Jim Carey, but he had just made he had made Ace Ventura, and it had come out, and he just made The Mask, which hadn't come out yet, for New Line. But somebody got it to him at New Line, and New Line said, and he said, "I love this script." And so New Line said, "Well, okay, we'll co-produce it with the other producers because it was less of a risk for them to be in a co-production." And that's how that got started. Yeah, and so that created the rest of the momentum for it, really. And I mean, and they New Line felt pretty confident that the Mask was going to be big. I mean, and I remember meeting Jim. The first time I met him was the day I saw Ace Ventura. So it was in the theaters at the time, and I remember I was watching the movie and I was laughing at it, but I was thinking like, this character is so extreme. Is that what he's going to do in Dumb and Dumber? He's going to be like making faces the whole time. And the first thing he said when I shook his hand was, "Look, I want to just assure you, I'm not doing Ace Ventura. I'm going to do the character." And I said, in my head, I was like, "Oh, thank God." Uh, but we were very lucky because he was basically he had done some films before, but he was really known from In Living Color as like part of an ensemble in Living Color. But then
Yeah.
with Ace Ventura, suddenly he was a star. It was like he was a bigger star, and then The Mask. This is all 1994, by the way. The three movies released in '94. With The Mask, he was a big star. Now The Mask made him huge, and I remember going to the theaters to see The Mask when it came out, and because that was New Line, and New Line put a trailer for Dumb and Dumber onto The Mask, and I watched the trailer, and the audience was roaring. And I'm like, is it possible? Like, we're in the right place here. We're like, this is like a home run after these two movies, and we
Yeah.
came out at the end of 1994 in December, and we were in the right place in the right time with the right material that made people laugh, and we just were so lucky. I even remember it was number one. This doesn't happen that often now. It was number one through December into January too, and I called New Line and I said, "Guys, you need to take advantage of this. You need to put an ad that says number one movie in America 2 years in a row," and they did it. They took my advice, but we were so lucky. That's how it all came about. We were on the Carey train.
That's real cool. And the thing is, too, Bennett, it obviously it did well at the box office, and the reviews were very good. And that's how I always gauge how movies are. I know critics like to be tough sometimes. They'll give, I think of a Chris Farley movie, did Tommy Boy. I thought that was tremendous, and they
Right.
gave it 1 star. Some of the critics, and I always say this: it's not important what the critics think. It's important what the audience thinks. And if the audience goes to the theaters, that's all you need to know about how good your movie is.
Yeah, and I don't want to disrespect you, but the reality was it did not get great reviews. It
Right.
was a huge hit, but the critics were just nasty about it. And this is a perfect example of my beloved dear mother, who she only had one review of the movie. She only ever in my life had one review of a movie of anything I did, and it was a review. I wish I could remember what paper it was from of Dumb and Dumber, and the newspaper. And this was on her refrigerator, so this is the only thing she kept. And it said, "The writer's mother should be ashamed of themselves." That's my mom's sense of humor. That was the only one she kept, but it was. I wouldn't say revile, but it was not. Like, oh, more crap from Jim Carrey. But it was a huge hit, and over the years, the movie has become regarded as like
Oh,
there's been
it's
a
phenomenal.
history in terms of how it's regarded, and it sort of it's become part like a cult movie. You can't. It was a big hit, but it wasn't a critical hit. But you think about movies over the years that win the best picture, that are great movies, that are classic movies, but not all of them become in like
Box office hits, yeah.
or in this cult of where it's regarded in some affectionate way by people, and it's in the zeitgeist where I just today I saw another. So you're telling me there's a chance, quote, a meme. I see it all the time. I see it. So you can't make that happen. That happens. It just happens. It's some weird thing that happens in the zeitgeist, and it's embraced, and now it's intergenerational. People who saw it, who have kids, show it to their kids, and remember what I wanted. My fantasy was I wanted to do that for people, and to be able to be part of co-write something that did that for people is incredibly satisfying and gratifying. It touches me to no end. Also, writers, you're in a room with the door closed. You don't often get feedback from somebody saying, "I really like what you've done." So whenever someone tells me I like Dumb and Dumber, I'm very touched by it. I'm even touched when someone tells me they don't like Dumb and Dumber.
Right.
Oh, you saw it? That's good. I'm glad.
But I also think, Bennett, too, that sometimes critics, and obviously the two big ones over the years when I was a kid were Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. But
Yes.
here's the problem I always had with them is that they, you got to understand the difference between comedy and drama. A comedy is supposed to be silly. It's not supposed to have realistic endings or realistic plots, but it's supposed to make people laugh. So if it's making people laugh, then that writer, those actors, actresses, they're doing their jobs. And I always felt like sometimes them and other critics, they're just looking at, they're trying to make it real life, what real life would be. But it's not supposed to be real life. It's supposed to be a comedy. It's supposed to be fiction. And you're just supposed to go there and you're supposed to leave that theater laughing. And I just always feel like sometimes the critics don't understand that difference.
Well, I think critics aren't, they feel that their job is not to be the audience, but to be something more than the audience, to be to sort of to give out some sort of, they like, the audience is you, but the critic is the intelligent, the person who went to school and has all of the material to evaluate the movie in a way that an audience doesn't, and so that they and I there's a difference between a critic and a reviewer sometimes, because a reviewer will sometimes just say the plot and
Yeah.
they like it or not, but then a critic is criticizes it, it goes into it and actually, like basically writes an essay with their knowledge, explaining why the movie for them works and doesn't work and on. So they function in a very different way than just an audience member does, and I think they feel that's what they're supposed to do. That's what. It's funny that you say for Siskel and Ebert, because I'll never forget Roger or Gene Siskel, Roger Ebert's review, because they were mixed, but Roger Ebert said there's a moment, you can watch this on YouTube. There's a moment in this movie that made me fall out of my chair laughing, and he didn't recommend the movie. And I'm like, what do you want, Roger?
Yeah.
You fell out of your chair. About 2 months later, he, at the end of another review, he said, I want to just go back and reassess Dumb and Dumber. I realize now what Jim Carrey is about, and I appreciate it now in a way that I didn't before. So he actually, in a weird way, kind of apologized for that. But I thought it was the only negative review of the film that if I was watching it, I'd say, I want to see that movie. I want to see the movie that made Roger Ebert fall, that joke that made him fall out of his chair. And it had to do with Billy and 4C and the parakeet with the taped tail.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Bennett, it kind of lets me segue into what I mean with like critics and stuff like that. Now, the Dumb and Dumber movie with when Harry met Lloyd, that didn't get good reviews. And when I watched it the first time, I'm trying to follow everything, so I'm missing important parts in there. But I felt like with that movie and with a lot of movies, you got to watch it 2 or 3 times, because the more you watch it, the more you really appreciate how funny it is. Now, let's talk about that movie, because I'm going to tell you right now, one of the greatest lines in that movie was when Lloyd says to Harry, Harry says to Lloyd, here I'm bragging about my mother being the tooth fairy and you're Santa's kid, because his last name's Christmas. I mean, it's just a funny moment right there that's hysterical. Like, it's little things like that you laugh at. Or, when Lloyd is going to his bus stop and he's living in the school, he doesn't need to go there. So I really felt like that movie was very underrated and not appreciated until it when it was shown on TV, because it wasn't appreciated in the theaters, but definitely more so on TV.
Thank goodness for TV and certainly for streaming because everything. Back there was a time when you could only see a movie in a theater and then watch it on TV when it was on once a year or something.
Yeah, yeah,
And then VHS, good old VHS, Betamax and VHS came out, and you could start watching it over and over. I mean, that we were Dumb and Dumber was very lucky to be around at the time of VHS. I still remember when it came out, and I remember seeing it at all the blockbusters. And I went into a blockbuster, and I was so this was like a moment of humiliation. I was asking the person because it was number one for like for a big chunk of time. And I said, "How's it doing?" Whatever. And they said, "Oh, it's doing great." And I was like, "Really?" I was asking questions, and I turned around, and someone I knew was like standing behind me, and I'm like, "Oh God, you just saw me!" Like I was so embarrassed that you saw, like I was,
right.
my there goes my humility. I'm at a blockbuster asking about Dumb and Dumber, and you caught me doing it. But that's the thing about and the thing about streaming too is that it's so accessible now. People who've seen it and like it have seen it many times. They haven't seen it once. Fans of that movie know it backwards and forwards. I
Oh
mean,
yeah. I mean it, and I just like I said. I mean, it did, in my opinion, what the audience wanted. The audience went there hoping to laugh. I mean, they knew who Jim Carrey was, and they knew who Jeff Daniels was at that point. They went there hoping to laugh, and they weren't disappointed. And that's the other thing too. I don't, I know we're talking about the movie, so we could talk about Jim Carrey for another day. But it always bothered me sometimes how critics were to Jim Carrey because I really don't recall seeing Jim Carrey do a bad movie, and he's a very underrated actor who, by the way, should have won that Oscar for Man on the Moon. He was phenomenal in that. So, I mean, that's where like I have the big problem with the critics because I think Jim Carrey he gets a little stereotyped sometimes because he does movies where he's just a goofball, but he does what he's supposed to do, what the writer and the director ask him to do.
no, he's an actor. He's not a comedian. Although that's the thing is it's all about how easily what are the labels you can put what compartment can you put somebody in. It's so much easier when you can just lock them into a comedian, impressionist, but when they're more than that, when they do all that, and then they're also a terrific actor too. Most comedians that end up they have the capacity to be and very often are terrific actors too. And yeah, he's good because he can access everything. He's so great in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which I thought was one of his best performances. Plus,
Yeah.
it's a great movie and
Truman Show was tremendous.
Show. Yeah, he's a.
Yeah.
But of course, you're just thinking of the guy who laughs, and of course, people's image of him is like, oh, what's he like in real life? Because is he that crazy? And no, he's a human being who's an actor who is appropriately serious when he wants to be and has a strong wit when he needs to be, but he's not making faces, and it's not like he's on the stage at the comedy club all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But so let me ask you this, Bennett. If I'm not mistaken, aren't you going to do an updated version, or you wrote an updated version of Police Academy? That's going to be coming out soon, correct? Or if it hasn't already?
Sadly, it's not. I did do it. I co-wrote that. I worked with a good friend, my friend Brian Levant, who is the writer director. He did the Flintstones and Jingle All the Way, and Brian's great. Brian comes from television. He was the showrunner on, at one point, he took over Happy Days. So he was a showrunner on Happy Days, and he loves a writer's room. Writer's rooms are so much fun. You get together every day with a bunch of funny people, and you sit and, okay, 25% of the day you're just making bad jokes that have nothing to do with and then we got to get to work here. And then you just, it's so much fun to write a comedy. I've worked with Brian several times, and I always work with a writing partner. So I worked with Peter and Bobby for years. And then after that, I worked with another writing partner, Mark Stylen. And then after that, another writing partner, Rick Kopp, who co-wrote, worked on The Golden Girls with his writing partner at the time named David Goodman. David Goodman is now the president of the Writers Guild. But I'm always, and then now I've written for like 17 years with my writing partner James Johnston, and we've done. If you go to IMDb, you'll see we've done a bunch of stuff together. I love writing in a writer's room, and so Brian Levant was hired by Warner Brothers to do a reboot, for us to do a reboot of Police Academy, and it was so much. Sadly, it was so much fun because we had such a good time writing it. We had a great writers' room. One of the people who sat in the room was the producer of the original, the producer of all the good ones, Paul Maslansky. And Paul, when we were done, Paul said, "This is the most fun I've ever had ever in my career." You know, he had such a good. It was such a joy to have the producer who would laugh and contributed so much. But what happened was something was up with Warner Brothers, and they just weren't ready to pull the trigger on it. And I remember Steve Gutenberg was calling every 2 weeks, going, "Is it ready?" And we tried to fashion it as literally like it was. The script was like a VHS of Police Academy that you took off a sequel you never saw that you took off the shelf in a VHS box and watched it. It had that same spirit. I really thought that was a lot of fun, but I don't know where it is now. This was a few years ago. This is probably 2017. But I wish it had happened.
Yeah, I think it would have been great. And I
it
mean,
would have been great. Even Netflix said we'll make it and we'll show it, but we also want to be able to show all the other Police Academy movies, and that's where Warner somehow balked about doing it. So I don't know where it is now, but it was. I got to tell you, you would have loved it if you like Police Academy. It was a very, very. It honored Police Academy a lot, and it was very much in the spirit of the original. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna keep the faith that someday it will. Maybe it will happen. But what could we look forward to? Bennett Yellin in 2023 and forward. Any projects coming up?
Well, I'm going to be running for president. I mean, yeah, actually, just before the strike. So my writing partner James Johnston and I, we like to write genre stuff. So we've written comedy. We've also written a Christmas family movie for Fox and the WWE called Santa's Little Helper. We've also written like a scary horror sequel to the movie. There was a thriller called Joyride, and we did for a direct DVD called Joyride 2. I think Dead Ahead. And so we like genre, and we wrote a spec on our own time, a spec supernatural thriller called Traction, and so what happened was there was a producer who was interested in it, and just before the strike, like the Friday before the writers' strike started, which was technically May 2nd, I think, he took us to breakfast. He said, "Guys, what's the reality of the strike happening?" And we said, "Well, it looks like it's going to happen, Brian." And he said, "Well, then I want to buy Traction," because he wanted to buy it before the strike so that he could put it into pre-production. He wants to film it in September or October. And so he did. We got our paperwork done and we signed everything on April 30th. And so we sold it because the strike was happening.
Right.
The thing is, we can't work on it because the strike is happening. So we're not able to do any more work on it until the strike is over. But they're moving ahead with pre-production, and the intention is to shoot it in September or October. And it's good. It's a supernatural thriller. Traction. It's a lot. It's a good one. I'm excited about it. I hope it comes out good, and hopefully the strike will end, and we'll be able to help them do rewrites of it or whatever is necessary before it gets shot. But yeah, and also it hasn't been announced yet, but they've got Udo Kier, who's a great character actor who's been in if you Google him, you're going to go, "Oh, I know exactly who that guy is." He's been in every movie from Google Udo Kier, and you'll go, "I know exactly who that actor is." He's been around forever. He's cast as an evil doctor. It's about the elevator pitch is this young girl wakes up in a hospital. She's in
Yeah.
traction, so she can't move, but she has amnesia. She has no idea who she is, no idea where she is, nothing, doesn't know what happened to her. And someone or something doesn't want her there. And that's the where it begins. So traction. Look for it next year. It'll hopefully come out next year with
Oh,
Ludo.
definitely looking forward to that. So Bennett, let me also ask you this: what if there was like one reboot movie that maybe you didn't even write, but that you got the opportunity to write a reboot of it?
Yeah.
You know, we've seen it with different movies over the years where they have one in 1975 and then a new one comes out in 1995. Same things.
Yeah.
What would be the one film that you would like to write of an updated version or a newer version of it?
Well, I'll tell you two that I wish I had. One of them is actually being developed. One was made. One of them is
Yeah.
being developed, and then another one isn't being developed at all that I love. And so I'll give you three. Okay, the one that I wish I had because it was my favorite book when I was a kid was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Loved Charlie and the Chocolate. I loved Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory because I loved
Right.
Charlie. I wasn't as crazy about the Tim Burton version, but I just love that material so much. But at this point, it's been done. It's been done. The other movie
Right.
hasn't been remade, and I don't think it should be remade because I think it's a perfect movie. I think it's a little masterpiece, and it's on everyone's radar now because of The Glass Onion, and Ryan Johnson loves this movie too. And that is this thriller called The Last of Sheila that
Yeah.
was written by Anthony Perkins and Stephen Sondheim, and is just a delight. I've always loved. I saw it when it came out, and I've always loved that movie. And I know that I've heard that they're trying to develop a remake of it. I don't know why, because you can't improve on that script. And then the one that hasn't been done that I've wanted to do that is a thriller, a Canadian thriller called The Silent Partner, and it's with Elliot Gould and Christopher Plummer,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
it's this fantastic thriller about a mild-mannered bank teller who comes to realize that there's like he works at a mall, a bank in the mall, and it's during Christmas, and there's a Santa Claus in the mall that he knows is going to rob the bank, and so
Right.
when the guy comes in to rob the bank, he steals the money from Santa Claus because he keeps the money, and now Santa Claus is coming after him. It's a great thriller. It's a really good movie, but I read the book called Think of a Number, and I thought, oh my gosh, this could be remade easily. Although I do like The Silent Partner very much. It's like, to me, I don't want to remake a movie that's great. I want to remake a movie that they tried and failed and could do better at.
Yeah.
That's the remake. That's what I would peg for a remake, not necessarily. But I love The Silent Partner so much, and I like the book so much that I thought you could add more from the book. Yeah, those are the ones. But I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't want to remake something. I wouldn't want to. I mean, you can't. The Police Academy wasn't a It wasn't a reboot at all. It was, it was a sequel. It was like a sequel of the original. So, and that was what it was intended to be, not like a reboot, like reconceiving it. I mean, Gutenberg, he had a big part, in it.
Yes.
You know.
You know, before we go, one movie though that I'd love to see you do because I think you would do a great job with it. And the
Oh,
reason I bring it up is because you brought it was a classic TV show, but I would love to see it come on the big screen. I
yeah.
think you would do great doing a movie version of Happy Days. I really do. And I would love to see you do that because I think you'd have great imagination with it. And I know fans like myself would love to see. I've always wanted to see somebody do that, and I think that'd be awesome if you and your fellow writers took that opportunity to at least, entertain it.
That would be thrilling. I'll tell you what, you'd have to get Brian Levant, who was the showrunner on it. You'd have to
Yeah,
get Brian to direct it. He would put
right,
together such a writer's room for that. And also he would guide it in such a way because that everything about that show is organic to him. So he would know what was wrong and what was right. Oh God, that would be
right.
so fun. Yeah.
Maybe we'll find out what finally happened to Chuck, but you know, I just think that would be great. But in all seriousness, though, Bennett, I appreciate you giving me a few minutes today. was a
Thank-
real pleasure and honor for me. I enjoy your work very much. And I
Thanks.
mean, listen, no matter what happens the rest of your career, you have written an iconic movie that fans to this day, somebody's watching it right now, I could guarantee you. And that's a credit to you, to Bobby, to Peter. It's just, I really do applaud the work you guys do, and just keep making more movies because we really need them. And thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. I really do. Yeah.
Well, folks, there you have it. That's the one and only tremendous writer, tremendous person. And if he's writing a movie, you got to believe we're going to be entertained. We're going to go in there laughing. We're going to walk out of there laughing. That's the talent of Bennett Yellin. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone. All right.